Hello everyone, welcome to Gnana Deeksha, a concept-based digital learning. I am Sandhya Deepthi from TSWRDCW, Nizamabad. George Bernard Shaw, an Irish playwright, once said that 2% of the people think, 3% of the people think they think, and 95% of the people would rather die than think. What do you think about thinking? How many ways of thinking do you think there are? So usually, thinking is grouped into three categories: insightful, experiential, and incessant thinking. Insightful thinking is used for problem solving, experiential thinking is focused on the task at hand, and incessant thinking is nothing but the chatter that happens in our mind. We are not going to look at these individual concepts, but instead we shall delve into the idea of insightful thinking because the topic of today's session is critical thinking. I would like to start off by reading out a quote by William Graham Sumner from his 1906 work, Folkways. Graham Sumner was a classical liberal American social scientist. He is one of the influential teachers at Yale University. He widely wrote and published in the areas of sociology, anthropology, economic and political theory, so on and so forth. Please take a minute to read the text that's shown on the screen. As I proposed earlier, the quote is from his work, Folkways. This work is subtitled as Study of Mores, Manners, Customs and Morals. We are required to observe that the work explicates the idea of learned behaviors and habits of individuals in society and how the frequent repetition of such acts become widely accepted. These habits begin to operate at a subconscious level and they persist because William Graham Sumner says that they are expedient, that is, they are convenient and they are practical, although they are improper and immoral. So this is the point where I believe that we as individuals need to consciously think and practice critical thinking in order to set our foot into problem solving. We shall come back to this point in a little while. For now, we shall look at the 5 major ideas in this insightful piece of excerpt through which we would be able to draw a map to critical thinking that's being discussed in today's session. Graham Sumner opens the lines by stating that critical thinking is the examination and test of propositions offered for acceptance. Propositions are nothing but statements or assertions. They carry an opinion or an idea. And these propositions are offered to us by the society, by the family or state, or by any kind of institution for acceptance. When an idea is put in front of you for acceptance, Graham Sumner proposes that we need to test and examine it first before accepting. So in the lines that follow in the definition, we observe that Graham Sumner is giving us the reason why we need to examine a certain claim or a certain proposition, because we need to find out whether they correspond to reality or not. As I said earlier, one of the problems that we face is that we all have the view of the world, and this view of the world is subconscious. It is governed by the way we are brought up, by the family, education, religion, and culture. So all of these have a major influence on how and what we choose to think and what we don't. How do we attain critical thinking? How do we unlearn our existing mechanisms of thought and adapt to a newer method of thought? Graham Sumner in the successive lines presents a possible way out or a solution that critical thinking is a product of education and training. When a person is educated, let me give you a special reference to university education where one is exposed to people from other cultures with other views and other experiences. So it's very important to be able to embrace and consider what other people are saying, particularly when they disagree with you. Then you go back and rethink your particular viewpoint. Maybe you can change your position on something so that we can learn from each other. Moving on to the next point that Graham Sumner is making, which is regarding the state and condition of critical thinking. What happens when you begin to think critically? He proposes that critical thinking is a mental habit and power. The art of thinking critically can be acquired and can be shaped into a mental habit, and he opines that this habit is powerful. Please think about the idea of power at this point. How did power come into picture here? When an idea or an opinion is accepted and practiced by a large number of people, it eventually turns into a norm, and therefore it will be established as a powerful practice which cannot be opposed and it cannot be confronted. Take the example of social evils like sati and think about how they were rooted so strongly in the minds and culture of a society that was utterly lagging behind in critical thought, where individuals or citizens were not taught to question or criticize. When we begin to think critically and adapt it as a mental habit as citizens and graduate into a society that thinks critically by asking the fundamental why question, it gives us the ability and strength to square up to such powerful structures through reason, logic, and rationality. And therefore, this leads to Graham Sumner's next idea that he puts forward, that critical thinking is a prime condition of human welfare and men and women should be trained in it. We need a thinking society. We see Graham Sumner summing up the entire definition by driving home the point that critical thinking gives us the guarantee against delusion, deception, superstition, and misapprehension of ourselves and our earthly circumstances. Because we all know that the human condition is vulnerable and we are prone to so many irrational power structures that control our lives. In this definition, we have seen that what happens in critical thinking is that we examine and test the propositions. Why do we need to do it? We need to do it because we need to know if it corresponds to reality or not. And we acquire it through education and training. It is very important because Graham Sumner opines that it is the prime condition of human welfare. And why is it very necessary is because it guarantees us against delusion, deception, superstition, and misapprehension of ourselves and our earthly circumstances. How do we understand this process of critical thinking? I would like to bring in two diverse examples here. One, we are going to look at how critical thinking has shaped cultures and brought about revolutions in the history, not just in the political scenarios of the nations, but also how it has been shaping art and literature across the globe. Secondly, we are also going to look at how critical thinking operates in our everyday life. So, here the two contrasting examples are going to provide us the framework through which we will be looking at the significance and effects of critical thinking. First example is from the history. I would like to take the example of a concept. It is a movement in art and literature called as social realism. Social realist tradition has been followed by the writers and artists to bring out the realities of the world in their artwork and writings. It is a movement that flourished between the two world wars in response to the social and political turmoil and hardships of the period. So the artists turned to realism as a way of making art easily accessible and legible to the wider public, often portraying their subjects, including well-known figures and anonymous everyday workers, as heroic symbols of persistence and strength in the face of adversity. Through their work, they aim to call to attention the declining conditions of the poor and working class and to challenge the governmental and social systems they held responsible. I would like to quickly brief Russian Revolution and look at how thinking of a nation has shaped its history. So the Russian Revolution took place in 1917 when the peasants and working class people of Russia revolted against the government of Tsar Nicholas II. They were led by Vladimir Lenin and a group of revolutionaries called the Bolsheviks. The new communist government created in the country of the Soviet Union. Before the revolution, Russia was ruled by a powerful monarch called the Tsar. The Tsar had the total power in Russia. He commanded the army, owned much of the land, and even controlled the church. During the period of time before the Russian Revolution, life for the working class people and the peasants was very difficult. They worked for little pay, often went without food, and were exposed to dangerous working conditions. The aristocrat class treated the peasants like slaves, giving them few rights under the law and treating them almost like animals. A major event leading to the Russian Revolution took place on January 22, 1905. A large number of workers were marching to Tsar's palace in order to present a petition for better working conditions. They were fired upon by soldiers and many of them were killed or injured. This day in the history of Russia is called the Bloody Sunday. In 1914, World War I began and Russia was at war with Germany. A huge Russian army was formed by forcing working class and peasant men to join. Although the Russian army had great numbers, the soldiers were not equipped or trained to fight. Many of them were sent into the battlefield without shoes, without food, and even without weapons. So over the next 3 years, we see that nearly 2 million Russian soldiers were killed in the battle and nearly another 5 million were wounded. So the Russian people blamed the Tsar for entering the war and getting so many of their young men killed. We see that in this whole scenario, there are 3 things that are happening in this story. The first is there is a strong boundary between the aristocrats and the working class. Secondly, we see that common people are exposed to dangerous working conditions. Thirdly, we see that common men sent to army without food and water. This being the background to social realism, we see writers, filmmakers, leaders, photographers, and artists engage themselves with ideas and subjects that are close to reality, that are close to common man. Let us take a look at these paintings. The first painting, titled Lenin with Villages, it depicts the subject of everyday workers. We see that the artist using the subject of everyday workers as heroic symbols. This painting represents a classless society. Therefore, this painting is socialist in content. The second painting is Happy Reuniting. In this painting, we see a soldier coming home from the war and all the family members gathered around him. So the subject in this painting is war times. We also see that the artist portraying soldiers as the pride of the nation, and subject in this painting is also closer to common man and it is closer to reality. The next painting is Young Steel Workers. Here also we see that the subject is about labor and suffering. How common people work hard in the factories. There is so much of child labor. We see that the artist is trying to bring out the reality. Bring out the common man as a subject in the painting. So, not just in paintings, we see that in 1930s, the trend or the movement of social realism becoming the prominent trend in Russia. So, when it comes to literature, we see that its leading figure is Maxim Gorky. Maxim Gorky is the one who laid the foundations of his style in literature, especially in his work titled Mother of a Traitor. In this work, he wonderfully explores the themes of mother, son, nation, identity, citizenship, and war by meticulously following the mode of social realism in the narrative of the story. Not just in Russia, we see artists and writers from elsewhere also adopting this method of social realism in their work. We have Grantwood's painting American Gothic that has become the icon of social realism in America. Next, we also have Mexico's popular mural artist Diego Rivera. He also experimented with social realism during the times of Mexican Revolution. You can also take a look at his painting titled Man at the Crossroads. What I am trying to arrive at in this discussion is that where do ideas like social realism come from? Not just this. We have so many art and literary movements in history. Some people agree with these ideas and some don't. It is not necessary that all of us should agree with a particular idea. Nevertheless, we can bunch these thinkers together and they might be a school of thought. One of the examples that comes to my mind in the current context of our discussion is Marxism. Marxism is a powerful school of thought. It's a social, political, and economic philosophy named after Karl Marx. Marxism seeks to establish an organized and classless society where the means of production is owned by the workers. So this school of thought argues that implementation of Marxist ideals is the next step for the progress of a society. We have seen how Marxism has a great impact on Vladimir Lenin, and he believed that the new Russian government should be a Marxist one. If we look back into the history, we see that how Lenin took full control of the government in the Bolshevik Revolution, and now Russia is one of the first communist countries in the world. There are many movements, literary and cultural theories, ideologies that shaped today's world. In literary theory also, we have various ideas and methods and critical thoughts that are used not just to read but to interpret literature. These theories do not give meaning to a work, but they reveal what a piece of text can mean and discover its underlying principles. So, theory is just a tool we use to understand any piece of text. Therefore, if we rewind to Graham Sumner's elucidation that propositions are subconscious, they control our thoughts. This is the very reason why one needs to interpret. When I say interpret, I mean one needs to critically approach an idea or a text. We come across literary and cultural theories that aid us in our interpretive approach as we carry out critical interpretations of the text. We have something called formalism that emphasizes on literary devices within the text. Next, we have something called new criticism. New criticism focuses on close reading of the text. There is Marxist theory. Marxist theory tend to look at representation of class conflict. And then there is deconstruction, where the self is considered as a decentered mass of traces. And these traces are left by our encounter with signs, visual symbols, language, etc. There is also psychoanalysis, which looks at the subconscious and subconscious imagery. And there is post-colonial criticism that investigates the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized in the period of post-colonization. There are gender and feminist theories that explore sexual categories and identities. So we have so many theories at our hand through which one might want to approach a text. When I say text, it need not necessarily be a written text, but it can also be a visual text like a painting, a film, or a poster, or a performance art like dance can also be considered a text. Everything around us can be understood as text. Therefore, how do we receive and absorb these texts around us? As critical thinking is one of the quintessential means through which we can safely deal with the world around us. Graham Sumner rightly said that it is very important to the prime condition of human welfare, and no doubt critical thinking is the only guarantee against deception, superstition, delusion, and misapprehension of ourselves and our earthly circumstances. So in this session, we have looked at Graham Sumner's definition of critical thinking, and we have also looked at the scenario of social realism. And as I have made a brief mention of the literary theories that are prevalent in today's academia, let's now move on to the next section of this discussion, that is, how do you interpret a text critically? What is the process? I would like to make an assertion here that critical thinking is not just confined to research or academics, but it is very much necessary for a society. Nevertheless, being part of the community related to education, research, and scholarship, we need to know the method and methodology of approaching something critically. How do we analyze something critically? So let us see how we carry out the critical interpretation of a literary text. On the right-hand side is a sonnet by William Shakespeare. A sonnet can be defined as a 14-line poem with a fixed rhyme scheme. What I want to bring to your notice here is that the structure of this piece of work on the right-hand side is very lengthy. That is, the structure of poetry is elaborate, it's intricate. But As the time passed by, writers and poets experimented not just with the subject but also with the structure and style of poetry and prose. On the right hand side, we have a very innovative Japanese style of poetry called the haiku. It's a type of short form poetry originally from Japan that usually consists of just 3 lines, not just the haiku. We see many varieties of poetry emerging in the modern times. We have something called visual poetry, sonic poetry, and today we see poets incorporating doodles and images into the text of the poem. Popular American poet Stevie Smith's Not Waving But Drawing is one of the examples where the poet doodles beside the poem. We also see Sylvia Plath, again an American poet, engaging with drawing. You could check out Ian Hamilton's poetry and see how the poet constructs the visual into the text of the poem. Coming to the critical analysis of the given haiku, falling sick on a journey, my dream goes wandering over a field of dried grass. When we analyze something, we literally need to pick the poem apart and look at its elements such as imagery, rhyme scheme, metaphor, poetic language, and so on in order to see how they all work together to produce the poem's meaning. We can see that the structure of the poem is short and precise. Therefore, we have descriptive imagery. Falling sick on a journey, my dream goes wandering over a field of dried grass. Any piece of text could have a surface meaning and an underlying meaning. Let's break down the poem by applying few WH questions. Firstly, what are the images that you see in the poem? We see the image of a journey, we see the image of a dream, and then we see the image of a field of dried grass. Secondly, what is the poet's state of mind or feeling projected in the poem? The journey feels sick to the poet, and the dream is wandering. It means the dream is not stable. And we also see the image of dried grass. What kind of a state of mind does this dried grass imply? It implies lifelessness. It implies death. Thirdly, you could also unearth the themes of movement and time in the poem. We see the idea of time in journey. The poet feels sick on a journey maybe because the journey is a long one and it has made the poet feel tired and weary. In the second line, the poet shifts from the idea of journey to dream. Probably it is referring to a journey that's like a dream. Or this dream that is wandering feels like a journey. Can you notice how he uses contrasting usage of movement in the first 2 lines? On one hand, the poet projects the image of a journey whose movement is usually linear, and on the other hand, we have dream image that's wandering, that is not linear and it is not stable. Then in the final line, we see that the dream wanders over a field of dried grass. Dried grass suggesting the idea of death or finality or of an end. We can ask a few more questions here. Did the journey finally come to an end, or did the dream end? What is the significance of dried grass? We know that grass refers to life, and dried grass, on the contrary, refers to death. How do the ideas of life and death, time and movement operate in the poem? It's very important to notice that critical thinking is all about asking questions. You keep asking questions, and that is how you analyze something critically. When you read the poem multiple times, you would discover multiple meanings each time, and therefore a small haiku poem like this one can have multiple layers of meanings and interpretations. How you understand a poem is different from how others understand it. You might have a perspective of understanding and looking at a poem, and someone else might have a different understanding or perspective of looking at a poem. Similarly, when it comes to critically analyzing a painting, just like how we detailedly looked at the elements in the poem, we can also analyze the elements in an artwork too. Before we analyze a piece of artwork, I would like to show you how art has transformed over the years. Just like how poetry has transformed from poets writing a detailed and intricate method of writing to a very experimentative way of writing poetry, art also has transformed over the years. I'm making a reference to Western art here. On the left-hand side is a portrait titled The Lady with the Ermine. It's painted by Leonardo da Vinci around 1489. Da Vinci is a popular Italian Renaissance artist, well known for his two significant works, The Last Supper and Mona Lisa. On the right-hand side is a self-portrait titled Two Fridas, painted by Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo is a Mexican artist. She painted this in the year 1939. What difference can you make in these two paintings? Woman is the subject in both the paintings, yes. Da Vinci's painting depicts a perfect image of a woman that looks very appealing and very pleasing to the eye. This is how women are expected to be during the times as early as 14th and 15th centuries, and this is how men wanted women to look like. As the time passed by, a lot of changes began to take place in the depiction of art and in the subject of the art. Earlier, only men used to paint women, and that is a given norm or practice. Women do not have any agency to practice art. The women that we see in Renaissance paintings or any other paintings are painted by men. If we go back to Graham Sumner's definition, where he proposes that we need to test the proposition because we need to know if they correspond to reality. So the opinion that the art should be practiced by only men is a proposition. It is an accepted idea and everybody followed it. But as the time passed by, people began to think critically. They checked if this idea of men practicing art and women not practicing art corresponds to reality or not. How is it justifiable? Why is art not important to women? Why there cannot be women artists portraying their own self? Why can't they have the freedom to bring into limelight what they feel about their own self? So this kind of a critical thought has shaped the art world, and today art has evolved so much in many respects. We see so many women artists all around the globe practicing art, and it is not just any other subject in the artwork, but artists like Frida Kahlo bring in their own self as subject in their work. So in the given slide, we see Frida Kahlo's painting. This is not her image done by someone else, but this is her image done by the artist herself. It is called self-portrait. This painting titled The Two Fridas suggests contradicting imagery. The two bodies depicted in this artwork could be suggesting the dual self of the artist. Though the bodies are separate, they still exist in some relation with each other. We can see this aspect of relation in the depiction of connected hearts and hands. They do not merge into each other, but exist in parted bodies, each wearing divergent light and darker shades of gowns. So one is wearing a traditional Mexican dress and the other is wearing the Victorian style. We see this contrast operating at many places in this painting. And this contrast is more emphasized in the details of their hands. If you see, one hand is holding the forceps that had cut the blood vein coming from her heart. It is open and it implies a sense of susceptibility, sense of toleration and wound. This is in contrast to the other hand, which is closed by holding an image of her husband, Diego Rivera, and this is not open, wounded or bleeding. Both the objects in the hands imply a sense of pain. One is closed and the other is open. There is a sense of within these contrasting images. Do we notice how these paintings are very different in their approach? If you look at Da Vinci's painting, it serves a very superficial image or idea, and how women are represented in Da Vinci's painting may not be the truth, whereas Kahlo's paintings is close to reality and it corresponds to truth. So, to sum up, in this session we have looked at Graham Sumner's definition of critical thinking. We have next looked at how critical thinking shaped history. In this context, we took the example of social realism in the background of Russian Revolution, how Marxism, an ideology of critical thought, has shaped Russian nation. We have looked at how art and literature has transformed because writers and artists deviated from the mainstream and traditional ways and have experimented with art and writing. Lastly, we have also critically analyzed a haiku poem and also critically looked at Frida Kahlo's painting.